would greatly appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about when the holidays aren't always happy. And that can be from a variety of reasons. So sometimes the holidays aren't as happy because of grief, whether a loved one passed that year or even if it was a few years ago. And sometimes not having that loved one there around the holiday time can be very painful, and so that can put a dimmer on one's holiday happiness. But also when it comes to loneliness, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, and we're going to talk about that. But when loneliness does occur, then that definitely affects us at the holiday time. And then lastly, we're going to talk about family boundaries, and when our families and friends and loved ones aren't always on their best behavior when it comes to holiday time. All right, so overall, the holidays are expected to be a happy time spent with a significant other or a close family as far as expectations, extended family, friends. Holidays are supposed to have like magazine perfect food and soap opera perfect decorations. And we watch TV ads where a spouse surprises their loved one with a new car with a big bow on top, or Hallmark channels where everyone's dreams come true. And some holidays are like that, but in life we go through many ups and downs and a lot of unexpected events, and so not every holiday was always going to be happy. But you don't want to necessarily bring down someone else's we don't want to always necessarily bring down someone else's happiness if they seem so happy, so we usually hold it in. We usually don't tell anyone else that, this just may not be the greatest time for us right now. And although Jesus really is the reason for the season, for Christmas, these traditions, being with loved ones do become very important to us over time and important to our families. And so sometimes there's a little bit of pressure to be happy at this time. All right. So starting with grief, grief is different than bereavement. Getting a little bit of feedback. If everyone can mute your phones. But grief and bereavement are sometimes used interchangeably as terms, but bereavement is technically the period of time after a loved one or after someone passes. And grief is the uncomfortable, sad, frustrated, angry, hurt feelings that can come during a bereavement period or after when bereavement is supposed to occur. So to speak. So it can be missing a loved one who's passed away. It can also include an impending loss too. So it can include grieving over the loss of a loved one, over the potential loss, the future loss of a loved one who is terminally ill. Who is in the throes of it right now, who may have over a loved one who may have dementia and is no longer mentally present with us. So it's almost like they've passed away. That's particularly hard. It can be grieving over a significant change in life, like a divorce. It can be grieving over no longer speaking to someone who you really care for, and they are alive, they are well, but just you aren't getting along anymore. It can be grief over the loss of a pet. Some people become very, very close to their pets, over a miscarriage, or really just any other type of loss. It can also occur even if you had a complicated and sometimes painful relationship with that person. And sometimes people, if they've had a relationship with someone who has caused them a lot of pain over time or just at any point in life, they may not even understand why are they hurting them, now that that loved one is gone. But that can happen too, because sometimes relationships are complicated. And really, grief just shows how much you loved and cared for that individual or that person or that pet. So typical grief tends to last, well, and we say typical grief, but no one individual is typical. So these are kind of just very rough kind of estimates. But overall, the first 2 months of grief tends to be the hardest. But sometimes it takes an average of a year to feel like yourself again after a close loss. Sometimes 2 years, sometimes more. It really all depends on how close you were to that individual and how well you process grief, or if you don't process grief well. Some people try to throw themselves into work and try to just not feel, or some people try to be the strong one for their family and therefore not even processing their own emotions. And so when that happens, that only prolongs grief. And so sometimes it can feel like someone just passed yesterday and they really passed 5, 6, 10, 20 years ago. But so the first 2 months tends to be the hardest. And then sometimes it takes an average of a year to feel like yourself again, but sometimes much longer. Then pangs of grief tend to occur. So it's like a roller coaster along with highs and lows. And like one day may be a good day, and then the next day may be a horrible day. Sometimes reminders, triggers can really bring on pangs of grief. The first thing I always tell patients is the first thing to be affected is sleep. So it's just trouble sleeping, trouble relaxing, trouble settling down at night, impaired focus, impaired concentration, irritability. So those are some of the symptoms that may occur when you first start experiencing grief. And sometimes some people feel like they may even feel or see or hear their loved one, their presence, or may dream about them. That typically occurs during a bereavement period, and is a part of grief. In fact, I had a patient just this week who she took care of her father. He was ailing for like the last 1 or 2 years with end-stage cancer, and she said that she felt like she was from a different she was not African American. She was from a different culture, so she felt like he was coming to other people's dreams, but was not coming to her dream. And she said, I took care of him the longest. Why wouldn't he come to my dream?" So it's a cultural explanation for a common phenomenon that sometimes we dream about loved ones who have passed, especially if it was fairly recently. So that's typical grief. Atypical grief or complicated grief, as we term it, can transition into depression. So this is when the reality of the loss cannot be accepted. This is when one feels as if they can't move on, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, feeling like they just can't about that person being alive, and feeling that they wish they were dead too. You hear that sometimes people feel like they wish they were dead too. So this is complicated grief, and this is a bit more. This can turn into depression, and this also occurs when, or another symptom of this is when one feels inability to feel any positive moments or reflect on any good memories with that person. A rule of thumb, like as far as when individuals are feeling grief, is to focus on the positive memories with that person. Like, why are you missing that person so much? It's because you love them, and all those positive, happy memories that you had about them, then reflect on those. But when one can't even begin to comprehend, to contemplate on those moments, those memories, then we begin to think more about complicated grief may be occurring. So some tips for grief in general, but definitely at the holiday time, is to allow oneself permission to grieve. It's okay. A lot of times, especially in minority communities, we are told that we have to be strong. Which it really sometimes includes not really processing our own feelings and not acknowledging that we're hurting. And because yes, life does go on and we have to move on, but it's okay to acknowledge that we're hurting. We're human beings and we feel things too. And it's okay to stop for a moment and just cry, or just to feel, that you miss that person a lot. That's okay. Getting good sleep is crucial for any type of mental health. So if you're having any trouble sleeping whatsoever, I always encourage seeing a physician about that. Some people don't know that they have conditions that may be keeping them from sleeping, whether they be conditions that I treat like depression and anxiety and PTSD, or they could be organic sleep conditions such as sleep apnea. And if you're not getting good sleep, your overall health is going down, but that includes your mental health. So I always encourage getting good sleep. And sometimes the brief need for a sleep aid can occur, especially during early grief. Avoiding substance use or falling into other unhealthy practices, addictions, habits, because this encourages the avoidance instead of processing emotions. And these emotions are painful. So I do understand how one would not want to experience painful emotions, but it never gets to the resolution of processing the emotion if substance use is always used or under unhealthy practices. Compartmentalizing grief is okay though, which means temporarily placing it to the side in order for something to happen. For example, if you're going through something major in life, like, but you've also experienced grief recently, it's okay to divert some energy to that. You're not ignoring the grief forever, but you're just saying, okay, I have to get this done right now, though this is, major for me, major for my job, major for my family, or something to that degree. But I will come back and process this grief at some point, and that's called compartmentalization. That's actually a healthy coping skill. We can do that actually in life in general. If we have something going on, but something tragic happens, even if it's not death, we can say, okay, this is happening. I acknowledge it, but I will come back to it. Saying no. Saying no is okay because the bereavement period is not a great time to expend a lot of extra energy. It's not a great time to, I'll tell someone else, it's not a great time to gain new friends. But what I mean by that is, it's just, it's a very fragile time, and space should be given during that time. Space should be allowed during that time. And if someone's pressuring you to do something, and yeah, you usually do it. Yeah, I usually always make a great sweet potato pie for the family at this time of year, but I don't feel like it because I'm hurting right now. And that's okay. Or just in general, if you don't feel like it, it's okay to say no. um, Sometimes some people call it a Holy Ghost no. So you can allow people to help too. So if people offer, take them up on it. That's another thing that happens when people want to be strong, is they are very hesitant to let people in. And usually that happens when people have let you down in the past, where you did need something and you said, okay, I do need something, and allowed yourself to be vulnerable. And then the person really didn't do what they were supposed to do. So when that happens, that can be hurtful. And so it prevents people from wanting to rely on others again in the future. So regarding that, I just encourage if it's someone you feel like you can trust and they really do mean it, you may not have to have that wall there with them. If it's somebody who really does mean, like, hey, I mean it. If you need something, please call. I can bring it over. I can, pick up your child from school, or I can grab something for you from the store. All right. So let's see. The myth of being the strong one, or being strong for someone else, as I was mentioning, is often really just not dealing with your own grief. Although this is admittedly harder to do. I mentioned children just now. This is admittedly harder to do when you have those who still need caretaking. Like, you're still a caretaker for children, you're still a caretaker for elders, you still have to go to work. So it can be still hard to do. But that's why I encourage still doing what you have to do. However, be easy on yourself, give yourself compassion, give yourself grace. You don't have to always be the strong one. So do what you can for traditions this year. That's what I was referring to regarding the sweet potato pie. Like, if you can do it this year, cool. If you can't do it, okay. Just sometimes you can't do everything and be everything to everyone. It's also important to be sensitive to how others who are missing the same person may grieve differently from you. So one person may be tearful every day and crying every day, and want to talk about it. Another family member may not want to talk about it at all, and they may still be processing it, just may be more quiet about it. Another family member may want to honor that person in a special way. Just because someone that may not show it on the outside doesn't mean that they are not missing that same person. Everybody's an individual. Everybody grieves differently. So it's important to make sure we give our loved ones space, and allow them to grieve how they can grieve best. And sometimes people do need permission to talk about a loved one. So I've heard situations where some people like to go around the table and talk about a funny story about that loved one, or what they did, what they remember doing, or what they love best about that loved one if they're not there this year. And that sometimes kind of helps turn a little bit of the sadness into joy. Communicating one's needs is always helpful just in general in life, but it removes the guesswork from someone determining how you feel by stating it clearly. Sometimes people just really don't know what to say when they want to be there for you, but they just don't know what to say, and sometimes end up putting their foot in their mouth. But that's just because when you deal with grief or dealing with someone who is experiencing grief, it's an uncomfortable emotion, even if they're not the ones experiencing it. Sometimes they just don't know what to say unless they've been through it themselves. So sometimes just being present is helpful, just like how Job's friends should have done and how they eventually did. I believe it's just, to sit with that person. Sometimes just, be present, because sometimes we can't say the right thing necessarily. Um, when we view grief and loss from a spiritual or godly perspective, that always helps as well. Well, we don't always know the why surrounded by death. We just don't. There's just some things that we will not know until we get to heaven. We can ask God. But we do know that if our loved one was suffering, that they're no longer suffering. If we believe that they've gone to heaven, and if we believe that they've gone to a better place, that's always helpful to focus on. And counting our blessings. There's always something that can have us down and keep us down, but always also remembering, some things that wouldn't have to be, like just remembering God's grace, God's mercy in all things is always helpful, even if you're not experiencing grief. Some people journal, some people maintain regular self-care practices. So like if self-care can be anything, it's just a term that is very popular right now, but it can refer to just sitting alone in silence if that's what you want to do because you're an introvert and you don't really want to be around a whole lot of people, a whole lot of noise all the time. Or it could be watching your favorite TV show, things that you like to do that make you feel better is self-care essentially. So it's a very huge umbrella under which a lot of things occur, but other people might consider exercising as self-care, getting good rest as self-care. I can't go out with you tonight because I need to go. I need to get in bed at a reasonable time. So things like that. What else? Going to the spa, treating yourself to a nice dessert that you like. All those things also fall under the umbrella of self-care. And then therapy really does work. And I always encourage, when it comes to therapy, some people think it's like therapy. Like I think TV kind of maybe does some injustice to what therapy is. But TV does injustice to a lot of things sometimes. But as it relates to just sometimes people think that therapy is just like going in and just, saying whatever is on your mind. And it can be that. That's called supportive therapy, actually. We have a term for that. And just kind of talking to someone as if they were a trusted friend, but they're not, like a loved one. Sometimes when we bring our problems too much, if we're really, really going through and we bring our problems too much to that same person, then sometimes they get overwhelmed because they have a certain role in our lives. So sometimes if it's like a sibling, it's like, okay, I'm your sibling, I'm your friend, I'm your child, I'm your parent, but I'm not your therapist in the sense that, so yes, of course we can always go to our levels with our problems, but sometimes it can become too overwhelming if every time you see that person, you're going to them with the same problem or with different problems. They may feel like, okay, well, this is, this is not a mutual relationship. This is not reciprocal. And all relationships won't be reciprocal at all times, but at some point they should be. So then that might be a good time to pursue a therapist. And therapists can do a lot of things. They can help you deal with a particular problem. If you notice that you're running into multiple problems or the same type of problem at multiple points throughout your life. And if you feel like I always make the same mistake, I always run into the same pattern, I want to change this about myself, or I want to stop having these certain thoughts, things like that. I want to not be depressed anymore. I want to not be anxious anymore. There are specific therapies that are designed to actually treat those symptoms so that you can have long lasting progress there. And in addition to stating what you want along those lines, when you meet with a therapist, finding a good therapist that's a good fit for you is helpful too. Not everybody's going to be a good fit. And because of that, we really must make sure that if we do pursue therapy, that we're with someone who we feel comfortable with, we can express ourselves, and we feel like they're competent and caring enough to help us. Griefshare.org is a great community resource. I'm also going to send out this handout from which I'm speaking to Pastor and ask him to send it out through email too. And it's going to have some of these resources listed on the handout. But griefshare.org is a great community resource. It costs a very nominal amount, $5, I think, maybe per session, something like that. And it's hosted in many different churches across the country. So when you go to the website, you plug in your zip code and it comes up with a list of churches. And they usually always have things around the holidays, but all times of the year as well, for just it's a group therapy for dealing with grief. Very helpful. All right, so that was talking about grief. So I'm going to move on to boundary setting and then loneliness. And at the end, I want to open it up for any experiences that you like to share or if you have any questions. All right, so boundary setting, saying no during the holidays and family dysfunction. So we are all part of a family and we don't get to choose our family, but we also don't have to be defined by them. And we can limit our interactions with them if they are not healthy. So for example, we may make plans if we sometimes because of family dynamics, we may feel compelled to be at family functions. And this again, this talk isn't for all situations, but when this is the situation, some of these tips can be helpful. So sometimes there's a feeling of one being compelled to, well, I have to go, so I have to be with the family this time of year. Could be with them, but you might not have to be with them too if they're causing a lot of distress for you. But if you do feel like you have to be with them, you make plans to eat dinner with your family on the actual holiday, and then plan a big day maybe with friends the next day. Adjusting expectations of what others should be doing is a very important one because we can only control ourselves. We can only control our own mouths. We can only control our own behaviors. Because of that, we cannot, well, not because of that, but we just cannot control what others are going to do or say. So I can't control if my aunt is going to show up intoxicated at the family dinner and say a bunch of hurtful things, but true or untrue, I can't control that, but I can control myself. And when I choose to engage in, I can remove myself and go to another room. Avoiding hot button topics is also very helpful. So if someone tries to bring up hot button topics, politics, of course, is always a hot button topic, or just religion. And sometimes we have a lot of varied family members, but just not engaging in topics. Oh, what did they bring it up? I'm not talking about that today. And if somebody tries to throw little jabs, sometimes thinking of lighthearted responses ahead of time is very helpful, or just maybe ways to change the subject and say, you know what, maybe very directly, I don't want to talk about that. Maybe later, I'll let you know. But just tips to kind of fly over some of the mess that may occur instead of like flying through it. And sometimes not taking everything personal helps. And I say that in the sense, in the specific situations when sometimes some people are just miserable. And we know that misery loves company. So we know that it's not enough for them to be miserable. They must go around spreading their misery and trying to bring other people down. And if that's the case, it's important to remember that this isn't, yes, she or he is talking to me at this moment, but this is really how they interact with everybody that they meet. So in that sense, that may help to not take it so personally. And being able to communicate, this is just a helpful tip in life, period. If you can communicate your desires, which is just being assertive, without heightened emotion, that will always win. Because when we bring heightened emotion with it, people stop listening to us and they only focus on emotion, which is unfortunate, but it's a very common response. And it's okay I'm not saying it's not okay to be upset, but if you're able to state what you're feeling without kind of flying off the handle, people will be able to hear you a little bit better. And that typically allows for more positive communication to occur, even if the topic is uncomfortable. Now, if some of these tips do occur, always be prepared for potential scapegoating. Sometimes family dynamics are like a train that's on the track, in that this is the way we do things, this is the way we interact with each other, and this is just how it is. So someone not choosing to engage in the chaos is almost a little bit like someone kind of pulling the emergency brake and saying, I don't want to do that. And sometimes that even though it's dysfunctional and even though that person is correct and not wanting to engage, sometimes that train is still kind of going, a few more feet. And so don't be surprised if that kind of can happen as well. Trying to just pull you back into the mess. That does occur sometimes as well. Yeah, I do know people who have used some of their family experiences when they weren't always healthy for catharsis by like writing them in a book, changing the names and use this material for a book or a blog, which a lot of people can relate to, even if you put some, humor to it. There are a lot of like TV programs, movies, books about that, just, applying humor to like, my big crazy family kind of deal. So also you can schedule therapy appointments before and after stressful events too. That always tends to help as well. All right. And then I'm going to go into loneliness during the holidays. And then, as I mentioned before, I'm going to open it up. Or if anyone wants to share any experiences, any tips that they've used before, or any questions. So the last one is loneliness during the holidays. And as I mentioned before, there is a difference between being lonely and being alone. Some people like to be alone. I have a lot of times where I like to be alone, just in general, because I'm sociable, but I'm a sociable introvert. Meaning that I do like people, I do like to do things with others, but I like my alone time as well. And it's so funny because I was talking to a patient not too long ago, earlier in the month, and he was saying, "Well, I got invited to a couple of places." He lives alone. He said, "I got invited to a couple of places for dinner, but I'm not gonna go because I went last year and I didn't know what those people were talking about." He said he ate dinner, but he said he was good on that. So he said this year he's just gonna buy himself dinner and enjoy it while watching football. So, loneliness and being alone are two different things. And sometimes they both occur. But then sometimes uh, one is lonely. So and also let me say this too. Sometimes you can be around others and still feel lonely too. So that happens as well. What I would say to that is a few things. One is mindfulness, which is mindfulness is paying attention to the moment, being very present in the moment, no matter what you're doing. For example, there's mindful eating, which is where you savor your food as you eat it instead of like wolfing it down, but just like noticing like things about it, the text, not just the taste, but the texture, the smell, you're smelling it before you eat it. Um, um, uh, how does it look? Paying attention to it before you eat it, and eat chewing more slowly, enjoying every moment of that. Well, mindfulness can be practiced in many areas of life, but also with one's emotions. And so a lot of times we tend to brush past emotion because we have things to do, because they're uncomfortable. But being clear about, when our feelings are hurt, or if we're angry about something or sad about something, or if we're feeling an emotion such as loneliness, being mindful about it. So first to acknowledge that that is occurring, but don't dwell on it because when the dwelling in it can sometimes trigger other things like depression, for example. Also, I recommend not contributing to things that may contribute to loneliness or not engaging in things that may contribute to loneliness. For example, like the Hallmark movies where everything seems to be working out perfectly for everyone else, or like watching, being on social media where people always are known to post typically their best situations, their best pictures, their best holiday moments, their vacations. People usually, of course, you have some people who do talk about their problems on social media, but overwhelmingly, it tends to be when people are proud of things and then they post it. So not kind of falling into that, I don't say facade, but that imagery that everybody's enjoying the holidays but me, that kind of thing. Um, and loosen rigid high expectations during this time as a result, yeah, it feels like, okay, well, everybody has someplace to go, but I may not have someplace to go. But again, that may not be the case. Acknowledge what does give you joy and be mindful with it instead. So shifting that focus is kind of like worrying versus praying. I could worry, spend a lot of time doing that, or I could pray and do something about it and just thinking about it, but giving it to God, thinking about it. So being a little bit more productive with it. So whatever that be that allows you to feel joy. So whether that's a typical outlet, hobby, or project that you usually like to do, or if it's something a little special around this time of year, like art class, decorating, um, gardening, yard work, swimming, tutoring, volunteering. There are a lot of volunteer organizations, like Jose Feeds the Hungry is one of them, where, excuse me, when you can shift your attention to others who may need some things on the holiday, that can always be very helpful. Where they have holiday dinners for the homeless on Thanksgiving as well as Christmas. Um, and that I just remember that website is not listed in my resources, but I'll add that. But you can sign up as a volunteer, and on Thanksgiving Day, on Christmas Day, go to the holiday dinner event and help serve or prepare meals, serve, clean up, all those things, and contribute to others who may otherwise not have had anything at all that day. Um, Also, I always advise using the HALT method, HALT, regarding decisions or judgment calls. When HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Holding off on judgment calls or decisions, or maybe calling up somebody who we may not really want to spend time with, but it's better than being alone. I always recommend halting. So when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, halting judgment calls or decisions, and that's for anything really, like a major purchase or anything, when you're feeling that way, that can avoid some regret later. uh, and then lastly, finding a way to make the day special for yourself in addition to volunteering or engaging in something new or typical, but it can be something much bigger, like taking a vacation with friends or by yourself, or pampering yourself in a home spa day or at a spa facility, treating yourself to a nice restaurant, as many restaurants are open on the holidays, providing for someone who needs something right now, someone in the church, a neighbor, taking a meal or flowers to someone, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, those, especially assisted living facilities and nursing homes, they never run out of needs around the holiday time, because many people are forgotten. And so it always helps, really any time of the year, but definitely around holiday time where some individuals may not get any visitation. During those times can really be helpful. Or connecting with a loved one who doesn't live near you, making sure that you take the day they may not be with you, may not can be with them physically on that day, but you can call and reconnect with people who you do really care about, or send them a note, those kind of things. Also, I just want to make a quick mention about relapse, for those who may have struggled with addiction of any type, because addiction is not just alcohol or drugs, but it can be gambling, or it can be food. A lot of addictions can occur, and relapses of addictions can occur during these times as well. So that's always helpful to be mindful of. As well around this time. And if that has been an issue for you or for a loved one, having a written plan, so writing down triggers can be very helpful. Writing down triggers, thoughts, or behaviors that may start to appear when relapse is imminent is very helpful. And then similarly, writing then a go-to list of positive coping mechanisms, or go-to people who you can call, who you know will answer your call, or at least call you back, can be beneficial for helping return to rational thinking during when you're extremely upset, or really during a potential crisis, just in general. So those are my tips for when the holidays aren't always happy. I hope that if anything was able to be taken away from it, I hope that it is helpful. And then, as I mentioned, I will send a list of these resources, including the volunteer organization Jose for the Hungry's website, as well to Pastor. Ask him to email it out. So I'm going to open up the line now, and if you'd like to unmute and share an experience that you've had, or tips that you've used, or have any questions, please go for it.